I saw this story and I thought it was interesting. You know, it's been discussed before it dropped, but there was an article out. Baxter Holmes wrote it for ESPN.com, and it's in regards to Robert Sarver, who's the owner of the Phoenix Suns, the majority owner of the Phoenix Suns. And the premise of the article is that Robert Sarver, in addition to being tough to work for, by his own accounts, tough to work for, he operates a front office that has racism and misogyny in it. And what's interesting about it is I read the article, and there wasn't one moment that I walked away and I thought that feels like racism. Now, that doesn't mean that I agree with what is said or written in terms of his use of language, but I didn't feel like there was any sort of racism there. And by that, I mean, racism is discrimination or antagonism directed at a person or people on the basis of membership of a particular race or ethnic group. That's, again, you just pull it from the dictionary.com. Right? It's dictionary.com is the you have to be prejudiced or discriminatory. Okay, if you read the article, what he's saying is the things that he has said, even if he has a poor choice of words or the type of choice of words which makes it hard, like, what? Who says that? But the act of racism is holding another race back or discriminating or antagonizing a race of people. Well, he apparently didn't want to sign Steve Nash because he was white. He hired a head coach because he was black. Again, this is all part of the article. And currently his head coach is black, his general manager is black. So where is the discriminatory practices? They're not there. Right? And it feels like when you read the article, here's a white guy, right? Here's a white guy who is kind of searching for, well, how do I position myself? How do I talk? What are the words that I use? How do I lead this team in this case, 2015, in the 2000s and beyond, right? I mean, this is a guy who's from Arizona. He's a super talented businessman, right? He founded Bank of Tucson. That's how he got his start. And then he's, started his real estate development, the Southwest Value Partners. He made a crazy amount of money. Right? And then he bought the Phoenix Suns for $401 million with some partners. So the idea is like I'm sure he's sitting there saying to himself, like, I'm now 60 years old, white guy from Tucson. None of these guys grew up like I grew up, made their money the way I made my money. And some of it is questions about language, specifically the N-word. And, I have no idea. I know Earl Watson well. And the crazy part about it is the allegations by Earl Watson are alarming. But again, part of it is he hired Earl Watson. He was the one who fired a guy who had been a great player in the NBA, or a very good player in the NBA, to hire Earl Watson because he wanted the players to be able to relate to their head coach better, right? Somebody who understands all the things they're going through. So I struggle when reading it and thinking Robert Sarver, it feels like Robert Sarver trying to figure out, like, okay, if you don't know, you shouldn't use the N-word. And I don't know if he did use the N-word. There are allegations that he did. It's one of those, hey, I don't care how much you hear anybody else say it. You can't say it. And that does feel like part of the discussion. But it's not a nothing burger, but you have the names put on the allegations. The most prominent name is Earl Watson, who was hired. Remember, he was the workout coach for the Suns, who they decided to hire as the head coach. And then when he was fired, he he didn't work in basketball for 2 years because he was still being paid by Robert Sarver. Now he's back in the NBA. So I find it hard to find the actual racism when I read the article, because there has to be some sort of discrimination, holding back of a race from attaining jobs. And that's not what that team looks like. That's not what the front office looks like. That's not what the coaching staff looks like. And apparently he wasn't taught at a young age. Like, it doesn't matter how much you want to be a part of somebody's culture. It's his issue is in the language that he uses, right? Because what he's accused of in the article is saying that you need, at the time, you needed Earl Watson to coach because he speaks the language of the players. You can take that if you want as, well, he's a black head coach. And so this is, but he was also young. And he was a grinder, and he made himself into a long-tenured pro who's super well-respected. I'm talking about Earl Watson. Like, Earl Watson's like the perfect guy that normally that guy becomes a coach, right? He's kind of undervalued coming out of college, a 4-year guy in college. You win because of him. He just plays harder. He competes harder. He fights for every tooth and nail for every possession, every night. Like, he's bright. You know, he's great with the guys. He's good with workouts. Like, that's the kind of guy that guys relate to, that guys work through. And the struggle that so many NBA coaches have, even Brad Stevens, as successful as he has, the reason he lost his job, and I don't know if it's simply because he's white, but like, look, Jaylen Brown is somebody who is very involved in the BLM movement. And the idea is that Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown had tuned out Brad Stevens because he wasn't an NBA player. He wasn't a high-level college player. They didn't feel like he spoke their language. They didn't feel like he related to them. So you bring in Ime Udoka, who also, great dude, made himself into a very good player, made himself into an NBA player, and then has been on NBA championship benches. He's more relatable. Now, to this point, it isn't working in terms of message. Monty Williams, why do you think, I mean, like Monty Williams, former player, been through a lot, not just his wife dying in a car crash, but he's had the ups and downs. In college, he missed 2 years because of a heart issue, right? Like, guys who have been through some stuff and can speak the language of a player. Hey, man, I've been you. I've been 35 at the end of my NBA road, and this is how I've been you. I've been 22 years old. I know what it's like to be a first-round draft pick. Those guys speak the language. So I actually read it, and I think a lot of it is how the perception of Sarver and how you take what he's saying. And look, you can't say the N-word. Doesn't matter if it's A, you definitely can't say it with the ER, but you just can't say it. You can't ask questions about it. You can say, hey guys, we're not going to say, I don't want you saying the N-word at all in my organization, regardless of how you speak in your own home. Here, we don't say it because we're trying to we're trying to change how people talk, how people think about the words that they use. That is the only possible way. But asking questions about Draymond Green and why it's okay for him to use the N-word, like, nah, man, that ain't it. I just don't think you can challenge that part. But I didn't walk away thinking Robert Sarver is going to have to sell the team. Byron, have you read the entirety of it yet?
No,
okay.
I have not. I just read some of the bullet points of it.
And what's the feeling you walked away from? Just bullet points.
Yeah, this is my thinking of it. If this happened to any of the employees who were put in those compromising situations, if they did those acts, what would happen to those people? And I think that there's without a doubt that those people would be dismissed. And so, like, in a way, like, it's, we expected this full out report of this whole enormous, scandal involving the Phoenix Suns. And I think that there was a lot in there that was pretty shocking and pretty damning. But again, like, when, as we look at it, I almost think that Robert Sarver is maybe getting a pass because maybe it was built up to be something. But the stuff that was in there was not good. I mean, it's not good at all. And I just think of it, if it happens to anybody that doesn't own the team, those people would be kicked out and moved along. But Sarver may be getting a pass because he's the owner of the actual team, which is, I think, the whole problem in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, like, look, Earl Watson is clearly bitter. Okay. Is clearly bitter. And a lot of it is the back and forth between the two of the the two of them. Like, that's the big issue there. And I think Earl also is totally woke. And they had a really, really ugly falling out. And part of it is that I'm sure Sarver thought, here, I'm going to champion this young coach, and I'm going to watch him grow, and he's going to become a championship coach. And Earl wasn't ready for that. He just wasn't. And I'm not sure anybody would say that at Earl's age, with his lack of experience, they were ready for that job, considering where the Suns were as a franchise. But a lot of it feels like those two had a bad falling out. I'm not saying any of this stuff is good. I struggled to find the parts where you're like, yeah, dude, you gotta lose.
Well, I'll tell you what. I think that when we saw how the Clippers reacted to the Donald Sterling report that came out years back, I think how the players responded to that report was one of the reasons why Sterling was moved out. I'm interested to see what the Suns players did. I just, it's that language, it's those sort of things that I don't, it's just, it's very difficult for me to get around. I don't know, to your point, like, those words they're not easy to say. And for him to kind of just be, I don't know, flippant's not the right word, but it just, to use it it rubbed me the wrong way in reading the bullet points. And again, I didn't read the entire article, but there were, things laid out of, an ice bucket challenge that went completely in an inappropriate manner.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, there are other comments. There's the N-word usage, and, that stuff is just, it's awful. And I don't know. Again, if it would happen to anybody else, like, those people would not be around. So I don't know why it would be any different for the Suns owner.
This is what Corliss Williamson said, that he'd never seen anybody. He'd never seen anybody treat others like that. But Joe Prunty starts, throwing things at him, at the owner. And Sarver yells, like, no adjustments at the time. I've actually heard of that. I've heard of a general manager walking into the Toronto Raptors, their current general manager walking into the Toronto Raptors and yelling and screaming at assistant coaches when they lost to the Cleveland Cavaliers in the playoffs. I've heard of that. It's a lot of this is, look, dude, you're just the owner. You're not our buddy or our friend, and you can't bust balls and talk trash. And it just nowadays everything gets taken to being, a different sort of thing than whatever you think your relationship. They work for you. They're not your friends. They work for you. And I think that he tried to befriend Earl Watson, and Earl Watson's team went bad, and then their friendship followed it. And one, you shouldn't hire friends, and two, he can't be your friend. I think he's tried to talk to employees and talk to players as if they're friends, and they're not your friends. They're not. And what's weird about it is, like, everyone talks about like Jerry Buss, Dr. Jerry Buss, and what a great owner he was. If you're old enough to remember, when Magic first came to Lakers, they were running buddies. They used to go out and hang out and go out and, talk to ladies together. Like, that's well confirmed. Like, it's not rumor. It's pretty well known, pretty well documented. Like, those days are really, really over, really over. But this is a story of loosely related anecdotes. And I do feel like it paints the picture of a guy who is weird and a guy who could be uncomfortable to work with or work for. But I'm not sure I see the actual. It feels like we're chasing it with the term racism, when it's just more, here's a guy who he's trying too hard to fit in. And the things he says in terms of basketball and the hires he wants to make. And, it's like they said, we signed Steve Nash in spite of Robert. Like, he didn't want Steve Nash to be his point guard. He was wrong about it. But that idea behind it is, I find it hard to say, well, that guy is absolutely racist. The problem with the difference between him and the former owner of the Clippers is, it was a poorly kept secret that Sterling was a bad guy. And then Sterling had on top of it, had the real estate stuff where, he checked a lot of the boxes for the old landlord and the things that he would do. And he had that as a bad reputation going against him. But he was super, super creepy too. And he got caught on tape. But with no tape, and you have one who's a fired former employee, and the other who is the other is one of the co-owners, it does allow for and you have a general manager and a head coach who are both black, and the franchise seems to have turned itself around. I find it hard to go, okay, I completely agree and understand the downside of this article. He's got to go. There is the element to it where you have bitter former employee and co-owner or minority owner who wants to get him out to take over the team. It's like, why would people lie? Well, why would they lie? Earl thinks he ruined his career. I will say that Earl is not, like, none of this is, his story has not changed. Because Earl and I, when he lost the job, I talked to him about it, and he was like, Robert Sarver, bad guy, uses racist language, don't like him at all, wouldn't encourage anybody to work for him. We didn't go into details like this, but he absolutely said, this is not a Earl Watson 3 years later going like, well, let me make up a story. No, this is how he's felt. But I do have to have the step back perspective of, like, there's some really bad stories and weird anecdotes here. But I also understand that, one, not everything that's said is exactly accurate. And two, it doesn't necessarily paint the picture and context of it. Right? I mean, like, there's one story there where there's Taylor Griffin, who played for the Suns. That's Blake Griffin's brother. Do you guys know that Blake Griffin had a brother? Do people remember? So yeah. Blake Griffin's brother, Taylor, played with him at OU, was built like an absolute brick you-know-what house, like basically looked like a bodybuilder. And I don't know if he had no hair in his legs or shaved his legs. Now, lots of basketball players either use the clippers, I use the clippers on my leg hair, or shave their legs. It's a very normal part of basketball. Like, you go to an NBA game and you're sitting down close, and you'll notice that either some guys don't grow a lot of leg hair, but a lot of them just use the clippers. Some will even shave their legs. So he asked Taylor if he shaved his junk as well. Again, I don't know context to conversation. And you're like, well, what kind of context to it? Are you guys going back and forth? Are you talking about how hairy he is and how much you don't have hair? Or are you talking about weird stuff? Or you're talking about Manscaped? Like, I don't know what you're talking about. I do know that there are guys that ask other guys stuff like that. I still find it to be creepy, but I do know those conversations do exist. And when private conversations become public and you don't have context to it, you're left thinking that I read it and I go, this dude is super weird, super socially inept, super uncomfortable. And he's trying to fit in with guys that are less than half his age and trying to be cool and trying to speak their language, and that doesn't work. But I don't know if that makes him a racist. I don't know if that makes sense. Jay Stu, I haven't heard from you on this. What do you think?
Real quick, before we go to a break, let's go to Jay Stu. This is a tough one for me, but I will say this. There are many quotes throughout this article from reputable people who do defend the owner. So it's balanced in that regard. There's a lot of unfortunate, inappropriate stuff in this article, but you always have to take into the context of who's got an axe to grind. And in this day and age, Doug, if you cultivate a toxic work environment, that's bad. But toxic is, you could interpret that in so many ways. And if you are a person of color or you are a woman, that could be taken as racist or misogynistic, right? So there's so many things in this thing. I just have a feeling that the NBA, again, I'm always on the side of this, is going to overreact and at least punish him in some way, shape, or form.
What is interesting is that Woj just tweeted that the NBA has launched an investigation, and Jason and I actually talked about this earlier. Jason brought up the point of, whether the NBA would investigate. I thought that they would have when this came out 2 weeks ago. Like, I thought that it would start at that point. if an NBA owner is denying allegations, shouldn't the NBA start looking into it at that point until, and not wait until a story is released before doing anything about it? Not that has anything to do with anything, but the news literally just came out, Doug, as you were talking within the last 5 minutes, that they are going to launch an investigation into the allegations.